Guys, episode 9 of Invest with Instinct here with Jared Tendler, who, if you've ever been around the poker world, you've always kind of heard his name around the ranks, but I think he's kind of shifted. I don't know how long it's been for you since
expanded,
but expanded. Well, it makes sense that you expanded there, right? It's just the next logical step in that maybe realm. So I don't even know what to call you. Performance coach, mindset coach, psychologist, like all encapsulating one thing in poker world, trading world, golf world. So is that a proper way to introduce you? And also welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, James. Nice school. Yeah, I mean, I call myself a mental game coach. I like the term mental game because it implies strategy that is ever evolving. I don't like the term mindset because it implies this like static way of approaching something. And there's a need for evolution, right? Like we don't have a one size fits all mentality or mindset that's going to work forever. And so you can get yourself into a mindset today, as long as you understand that it's going to evolve over time, then that's fine. But that's why I like the term mental game, but it's kind of a clunky term. I can't say psychologist because I have a PhD. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology.
Oh, you're just a PhD.
I'm licensed. Okay. I'm licensed as a therapist, but I don't have a PhD. So psychologist is off limits.
So, okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's jump back into what is it about poker trading where like we get into this aspect of suffering, whether it's you're in a long hand or a long tournament or something, or a trade that's just been lasting forever and you can see a target farther away, but like we almost look for that escape from the suffering of that moment because it's so overwhelming or high pressure. Like what are some of the kind of things that are making it so high pressure, and then like how are we supposed to deal with that?
I mean, the majority of it
is need the perfect answer, by the way.
The majority is because you care. I mean, your goals are on the line, your future is on the line, your self-confidence is on the line, your ability maybe financially to be able to pay bills this month is on the line, your ability to get out of a job that you hate is on the line. I mean, there's a lot of things that are on the line. You look in the sim, what's on the line? I mean, I do have some clients that are awful in the sim too, right? They've got a lot of emotional volatility because they treat it like the live market. But most traders treat the sim like it's a fucking playground where there's no consequence. Just like the driving range, right? The driving range, no consequence.
That's right.
And so you struggle to make that transfer because of the lag. There's just nothing on the line there, right? And it's just so because there's a lot on the line, then the emotional volatility, emotional intensity rises to levels, I think, in trading that are genuinely unlike most other things. Now, poker is very, very close. And I'd say the reason that trading is more volatile is because the amount of uncertainty is greater. The amount of variance is greater. Poker, there are more fixed variables, right? Number of people at the table, number of cards. Like there's more definable entities, so you can gauge yourself more there. Trading, the universe is a lot bigger, and then in both environments compared to like a normal day job, right? It's your money on the line, and especially if you are in the sort of the entrepreneurial realm, like you're running a trading business, right? And you get to be the risk manager and the manager on the desk and the strategist, but then you're also the one actually executing those trades, and that adds a level of complexity across the board. I don't think a lot of independent traders fully embrace the necessity to play all of those roles at once as an entrepreneur, just like myself, who I've got to be, I'm doing the books and the accounting and I'm, marketing, and I've got some people that are helping, and many traders have, whether it be chat rooms or platforms or coaches that help them. But at the end of the day, like you still have to be operating on a majority of these sort of tasks. So back to the question, there's just a lot of reasons to suffer because there's so much on the line, and that's kind of the easy answer.
So you mentioned like you get into this moment in those spots where like it's probably different for everybody, but your emotions in that moment are amplified. So that core version of you is amplified in that moment, so to the extreme. So for me, one thing I've learned about myself over time is like a catastrophizing, right? Feeling like if if either I don't close this trade or if I don't take this winner or whatever, like it always leads back to like going broke somehow or failing at this job or not being good enough. Like it all amplifies into those moments, and like something will happen. You'll use that as your escape, right? Like, oh, you see a tweet that goes against your narrative. Like, oh, that was it. That was it. Finally, I can get out. I can escape this or whatever. But being in that moment over and over and over and over and over is the best way to start kind of attacking that obstacle so that you can deal with it better over time. And like playing in the sim, I don't feel like you might run into the same obstacle, but like you might not learn the lesson from it because it doesn't actually hit you as much.
Yeah, there's no emotional, nothing gets triggered.
Yeah.
But I'd say there's something separate to what you just mentioned versus kind of my initial point here.
Mm-hmm.
So just the inherent nature of the game has built-in intensity to it. And that intensity is because of how much you care and what's on the line. But when you bring in your own internal flaws, biases, illusions, wishes, hopes, right? And the example that you gave of catastrophizing would be an example of an underlying flaw that many people bring in. Mm-hmm. So now you got the inherent uncertainty, and it gets amplified by now this additional flaw, right? Now you're not just like running in a race. Now you're not just competing in the NFL, but you now have like a small injury, or you've got like something under your shoulder pads that's like making it uncomfortable. And so then because it's uncomfortable, it's adding negativity to the overall experience, and ultimately going to affect your decision making, your performance, execution, etc. So it's important, and this is where again I think the mental game comes in, because it's impossible to not have any flaws, biases, weaknesses, illusions, etc. Right? They're just like, it's a continual. So we're trying to clean out as much as we can, and the game part is being able to step back and analyze. I mean, I think the easiest way to get started for anybody listening is just write down all of your the big recurring technical mistakes that you make. So if the example is you just described is right, well, I start to catastrophize and then I end up closing positions prematurely, or I don't even get into positions, that are viable because I'm worried that they're going to, I've lost the last two and now I'm worried the third one's going to fail too. So you just look at your big recurring mistakes and you start to gather up some data around them. What are the thoughts that emerge? What are the emotions that you feel? What are the physical signs of that? What are the actions? How does your decision-making change, right? Do you go looking for confirmation, right, with the tweet or other to confirm that your, sort of catastrophizing thesis is correct? But there's like a lot of patterning that exists around all of that. And, as traders do, you're looking for patterns in the market. So now we're trying to look for the patterning internally that we can kind of overlay over our own interaction with the market to understand what we're bringing into the market, right? Ideally, you are just there absorbing market data and intuitively being able to respond with a sense of what is right, or not that just straight, here is my strategy, just F and execute it as clearly as you can. But what happens is we bring this stuff in and it imprints a sort of film or a layer over us, altering our perspective, right? And our emotions become a big sort of highlight of that. Like it's a big sort of indicator of what is wrong. But the problem is a lot of traders, much like a lot of poker players and golfers, they don't have the ability to like properly analyze if I'm having, let's say, FOMO in this particular spot, right? It's when I'm middling along, not having, the greatest day, couple trades, scratch, make a small one. But I look on Twitter, I look in my chat group, like people are killing it. And then all of a sudden now, like that triggers a desire for me to feel like I need to make something happen and to make up for what I haven't even lost, but just in comparison. And so to then look at that reaction and say, well, you aren't actually fearing missing out. You hate losing. And it's not even the hating of losing of money. You're competitive and you hate losing out to other people that you're in your sort of purview. And so there's just a competitiveness that is out of line, right? It's great to be highly competitive, but when it crosses the line into failing and breaking down your execution, that's where it becomes problematic. So it's sort of doing the data analysis to figure out what's going on in the situation, right? Where those recurring mistakes are occurring, right? And then you have a way of being able to kind analyze what's actually happening in the background, which again I know is hard for all of you. But if you start gathering the data, it makes it so much easier to at least have a chance to do that.
Yeah, yeah, it does make perfect sense, and it's hard. Yeah, it's really hard to, especially because often some of the best times to do this are like fresh off of these intense scenarios, to really be able to step back and be like, okay, what just happened there? And so again, I'll use myself as an example. I'll often find that, and it took me a long time to be able to like kind of figure this out as an obvious James situation, is where I would just I would lock in and start trying to, I would just be over trading. I would not look at anything else. I would not be breathing. I would feel very intense, I'm a pretty chill dude, and I would be like zoned in, like, ninth inning, game on the line, um 12 positions on at once, just like trying to control the situation as best as I could, and it would just never work out. And over time, whenever I realize like, whoa, like, like I'm really locked in right now, it's generally not a good locked in, because when I'm like in a good locked in, I feel like relaxed. I feel no pressure. I don't feel that. So now I used to mistake that as a positive. And now I've seen it as like a complete negative. And now I just try to hit the eject button and like get out of there, because and it's funny because you don't necessarily see money come from that, right? Like when you're plugging leaks, you don't necessarily see like, oh, that doesn't help me win more money in a hand, but it's like helping you not lose money in a situation.
Yeah, and so everybody's goals are different. I would say that you're band-aiding the problem, which is fine. But that situation is going to keep happening again and again and again. It's going to require you to be super aware and almost kind of on guard, and maybe even like shutting things down prematurely, right? That for me, the long-term goal is to do deeper problem solving so that you understand what is driving that excessive emotionality. I mean, in that moment, there's heightened emotion that is clouding your judgment, clouding your thinking, and like it makes you kind of just locked in, raptured in what's going on in front of you, to the exclusion of what you'd say is kind of optimal decision making. So if you don't want to have to keep managing that situation time and time again, much like other traders, right? Whatever problems are typically going to emerge, right? It sort of just, it takes a bit of problem solving to figure out what that core flaw, bias, illusion, wish is. Because once you fix that, then that situation is not going to happen again. Now, it's going to take some time to get there, but we were talking before, like golf swing, right? If you're going to fix a golf swing, if you're going to fix something in your physicality, right? If there's an injury, which some traders have very profound mental and emotional issues, right? They've got desperation, right? They've got extreme like weakness and confidence, or extreme tilt, or extreme fear and risk aversion. They're like an injury, and it's going to take some time to like diagnose it, come up with a treatment plan, and figure out how to fix it. It's not insurmountable. Others, I think, like the example you're giving, it's like, no, this isn't an injury. This is just me not being as functional as I could possibly be. And so we dissect, figure out what that flaw is, and then same kind of thing. You're working in to practically build strength and corrections mentally, right? Early, well before you get to that spot. And if you do it well, 1 to 3, 4 months, like you can actually solve it. So then from that point forward, doesn't mean you're mentally and emotionally perfect, right? But it does mean that you're not going to face that situation again. You're going to graduate to the next one. Common example would be, a lot of times traders with a lot of fear, right? FOMO, fear of losing, fear of missing, fear of making mistakes, right? Keeps them on the sidelines. Maybe FOMO somewhat less, but let's just say keeps them on the sidelines. Then that gets solved. But then what happens? Now they start having to deal with losses more often, because they're now just factually trading more and trading with the way that the plan should be. And, their win ratio goes down, but that's expected. And they're losing more. So now they start having tilt issues, right? So then tilt becomes kind of the next thing. So there's a continual evolution that exists with this stuff. But I think if you're solving problems, you give yourself the opportunity to graduate to that rather than keeping yourself in what I would say is a safe holding pattern. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing. If that's what you and others would choose to do, it's not for me to decide. For me, I want to give you the option to understand that you can transform that. You can actually have those big jumps forward. And sometimes it's, a handful of those problems that are being managed, being controlled, that ultimately kind of creates these plateaus where it's hard to progress forward because you've got all this stuff that requires a lot of mental bandwidth day in and day out, right? You need to have that space freed up so that you can see from a technical standpoint, more opportunities. It's a hard thing to kind of fully calculate what the cost of that is, because there is an upside, right? The upside is you don't make dumb mistakes. You're not losing money in that spot anymore. But the downside is maybe you're not making as much as you could be elsewhere in the future.
I really like the golf analogy there. It's like you have some sort of mechanical thing in your swing where you've gotten really good at manipulating it to make it work, but the foundational root is back at like P1 or back at like intent as you're walking up to the ball, right? It's like before any of the actual swing, but you've just gotten really good at like figuring out how to like square the club face or whatever. But like everybody says, if you're on a Sunday at a major, like could that, even though you've gotten a little bit of control day to day, like in the major moment, will that problem re-erupt in a multitude of ways to where it's too overwhelming?
And Tiger was actually a decent example of this. He won the 97 Masters with a golf swing that required a lot of timing. And the Masters, for those that don't know, you can miss it in a lot of places. Especially at that time, there was almost no rough. So you could hit it everywhere. Tiger was a creative genius and could, get himself out of trouble. And so he relied on timing with his golf swing. And when he started working with Butch Harmon, they rebuilt his swing to rely a lot less on timing so that he could be more consistent overall and then have that top end access of his creativity and his power. Like all of it gets leveraged because there's a basic consistency. And so then, like me, literally, very, very few golfers would do what he did after winning a major. You think, well, I'm on top of the world. Well, no, it's like you are now, but things are going to break down. And I see it a lot with traders where they, have a great run and overconfidence starts to set in a little bit, and they don't understand like what is going to help them to progress beyond that, right? And how to stay hungry when you're doing really well is a very challenging thing. And to be honest and self-reflective of saying, all right, well, I am actually limiting myself in these ways. What am I going to do? What's going to be the catalyst? So Tiger worked with Butch Harmon 98, 99, and then 2000 US Open wins by 15 shots, right? US Open being the toughest challenge in golf. Wins by 15, goes on to have, his Tiger Slam, wins 4 majors in a row, not calendar year, and has, effectively like a 3-year run that was pretty much insane.
That was good times. Tiger prime time. There's nothing better. I feel like it's a good example of a professional being like such a professional. The open-mindedness for him to be like to like be able to take in maybe some criticism and they're gonna be like, hey man, like, yeah, we get it. You're amazing, but like we should maybe take a step back to like, I think Jordan Spieth's another good example of this, maybe, where like all this crazy early success and then he just kind of went into the lab and like he's starting to kind of reemerge again.
So Spieth's story was like, yeah, he didn't understand what made him successful. He just played. He just relied on not his natural ability, because obviously he practiced and worked, but he didn't understand his golf swing enough to know what made him great. And so when it broke, right? When the
Right.
momentum ended. And I personally, I hate momentum. I mean, I know a lot of you can rely on it. Sorry, you can use it, but when you rely on it, it's dangerous. And Spieth is an example of that. When it broke, then he had to go through and figure out and understand what made his game work, across the board. And he is reemerging. Uh, but I think one of the problems that he experiences, like many traders do, like many of my clients do, high expectations really starts to add a lot of negative emotion to that whole process. And Spieth is one that has incredibly high expectations of himself, at least observationally. That's my assessment. And so, his game is hot and cold. Like
Yeah.
he can hit shots nobody else can hit, but then he just does a bunch of boneheaded things because it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but when you've got these high expectations, it actually takes away the motivation to want to figure out what was wrong, because in your mind, if you're expecting something, you're kind of it's an implicit guarantee. It's like, oh, okay, I guarantee I can hit this shot. I guarantee that I can make this amount of money. I guarantee that I'm going to profit from these types of setups. And then when they don't happen, right, you just get pissed off and angry about it, or you lose a little bit of confidence. But are you motivated to work and improve and better understand some of the nuances that may differ from setup to setup or from shot to shot? And no, because why would you? You're expecting to be able
Right.
to perform there. So it's not to say that you're not motivated to be better, but you're not motivated to be as precise around it. And there is research to show this, that people who are overconfident learn slower and learn less,
Mhm.
which should make sense because they
Yeah.
believe that they're better than they are. And
Mhm.
high expectations is a subtle form of overconfidence. And Spieth, like many traders, I think, struggle with that, to have the proper motivation to be as pragmatic, practical, and sober about where they're weak and what they don't know. Um, and sometimes the answer to that is not black and white. And I'll give you another example, which is trader I was working with. He's described in mental trading. 16-year trader, oil and natural gas futures, and he struggled to execute trades that had a lot of intuitive sense about it. Right, he was the only one that kind of saw this position, and or this position kind of beginning to set up, and it was hard for him to really put out big bets when you're kind of out there alone,
Mhm.
and to kind of trust that. Well, what was the catalyst to get him to trust it? He spent time internalizing what made him great, what internalizing the roots of his strategy, and just actually writing it down. Like if you were going to have a 30-second elevator pitch of how you make money in the
Mm.
markets, or how you make money in these types of positions, what gives your conviction strength, and it made all the difference. So it's not a black and white, like, where are you weak, where are you strong, it's like, do you understand your strategy well enough that if I woke you up at 3:30 in the morning and said, James, tell me your strategy, 100% go, could you do it? And I think that a lot of traders couldn't, or they'd hesitate enough. And, so that's another example of like relying on momentum. You rely on waking up and going through your review and being able to kind of have a sense of, progression as you look at certain charts and positions, and, all of that kind of like wakens it up. But as soon as emotion comes in, as soon as some fatigue comes in, that strength and conviction shrinks, simply because that knowledge hasn't been solidified. So
Mm.
can you become what I would call unconsciously competent
Yeah.
about your strategy? Can you have your strategy be as much a part of you as just walking, right? Or like the back of your hand, when your knowledge is that deep, it becomes very, very hard for emotions to affect you in certain ways. Now, there's always going to be some deviation, but that's kind of the long and short of it.
Yeah. I think that when you're talking about Spieth, like it's a when I heard you say that, it made me think of just traders who win right away. Like, they jump in and they just have a lot of success, and yeah, so they have these expectations now. They understand things better. So once they hit that first wall, like not knowing why they're good, and they lose that first couple trades, like it all seems to probably just come unraveling, like it come crashing down, and then the the route out of that is going to involve so much more than the person who's like, oh, I'm probably going to lose for a little while as I learn how to do this. And like they do. And they're like, yeah, I expected this. And like they, they can kind of, and when I talk to people who are interested in like, hey, I want to like trade for a living, or I want to stop what I'm doing now. And I'm like, okay, well, I like to think of it as like the Nike swoosh. Like I like to think of trading as like most cases are a Nike swoosh of success, and most are just the first part of the Nike swoosh, and they just stop there because it's hard, right? But the people who do like that reverse Nike swoosh, like it's it's probably just going to end really poorly. So yeah, if you could, and that's maybe that's why Jordan's taken so long to come back, even though in the grand scheme of things, maybe it's not too long, and he's a special talent or whatever. But I wonder if he didn't have the success that he had early on winning the majors, if he would be maybe have the swing he has now, or the understanding, have it earlier and have more success now. I don't know.
I think part of it is the talent pool has gotten so much greater also.
Oh, they're all good. They're all
so like the line is just thinner. He doesn't have as much room for error. So, like, I mean, he's won tournaments, but like to win another major, to be like really truly world class in the Rory, the Scheffler, the Rahm category right now, he's got, I don't think, a long way to go. But there's a level of precision that gets hidden. And I know his coach is as good as they come, but it's Jordan's mentality, I think, that is limiting his ability to lever up his skills and with the kind of precision that he needs. And that, again, that's just kind of armchair quarterbacking it, because I don't have the inside in.
Sure. I've watched his coach's YouTube channel. He's
Cameron's awesome.
Yeah. So sticking with the athletes thing, I had a question for you. What, over the arc of your career, like what have you noticed when it comes to the traits that like physical athletes maybe are better at or struggle with than the mental athlete side of things with poker and trading? Do you tend to see like similar kind of things? I know everybody kind of has like those unique ones, but an overarching difference between the two, like what are they better at and what do they struggle with, and vice versa?
So I think both struggle to understand that decision making is technique. And when we treat decision making like you would train something physical, you can optimize it better. Now, both poker players and traders, by and large, are better decision makers than athletes are, because that is their inherent job. But I think you can benefit from just understanding that your decision making process for making trades, placing trades, is equal to a golfer's golf swing, and it can and should be trained, similar to what I was just mentioning about your strategy. Having that strategy be internalized, well, your decision making process needs to be internalized and trained as well. I would say in general, physical athletes have a much poorer understanding of variance, because the inherent nature of those games tends to not include as much, right? And I think mental athletes then, or the mental they have a much poorer understanding of training. And it's tough because those environments tend to be more void of consequence, right? You can create a lot of physical training regimens that will build consequence to help make that transfer from practice training environment to real competition. It's harder to do that as a poker player and as a trader, right? Where are you going to go practice trading with consequence? And we talked about the sim, and I gave an example of a client who was able to add in a lot more consequence, but it does, I think the gap is a lot worse. So what that means is that traders and poker players, they have to do different types of work. And I think the demands from a mental and emotional standpoint are greater, because you don't get as much of that practice. So to help make that transfer, you have to really ensure that your mental condition is as optimal as possible, because you're not going to be able to get away with, kind of some of the warm-ups that physical athletes would be able to do.
Do you think that it has anything to do with the fact that you deal with losing earlier. Like a lot of like great athletes, I feel like they have a decade runway before they experience like tough competition. So like they can just train, they can kind of get away with it. They don't have to be making like that many great swing changes or uh, technique changes or whatever because they're just so gifted. But like in the mental games, whether it's chess or poker or trading, like you don't really get away too much with like natural talent too. Does that make sense at all? Is that
It
anything
does.
you
I mean,
see?
um, I think natural talent does exist in both places, and it's maybe not the natural talent that reduces the losing in trading or poker, but just the inherent nature of the variance that's going to sort of force it upon you. But I mean, I don't know that we would say that every professional athlete didn't lose early on. Many of them actually, it's the opposite. That it is the hardiness of not winning that helps
Mm.
them to sustain the motivation. I think I don't know. It came up in conversation over the weekend, so it's the one that's kind of top of mind. But like Matt Leinart, USC quarterback, wins national championship, doesn't have a great NFL career, and I think why is that? Maybe we'd say part of it was because he didn't lose enough, early on in his career, because he was that blue chip guy that was just able to, was able to win and didn't have to develop that hardiness. But I've seen plenty of athletes, whether they be football players or others, who did struggle and or at many points in their career. Jordan, I think, is really kind of one of the rare golfers that recently that didn't struggle until he got to major, win 3 majors, and that's an incredible amount of time to be able to sustain that. Most golfers don't, and there's a lot of losing in that. Baseball players, right? It's just rare that guys are true blue chippers. But look at like a Bryce Harper, right? I mean, perennial number 1 pick at 17 years old, was predicted to be, kind of who he is now. But he struggled for a while, as a pro, and it sometimes can take a long time to really actualize that potential. Then you got a guy like I'm forgetting the pitcher's name for the Nationals, who actually just retired this year. Anyway,
Not Scherzer, right? Scherzer.
no. He was like kind of the next up and coming. Well, I mean, he was a great ended up being Strasburg. Yeah, exactly, Strasburg. I mean, they like protected him too much, right? Maybe there was not enough pain inoculation built into his early part of his career. Maybe that hurt him because they protected him so much that he ended up busting it anyway. So there's no right or wrong answer, but I think I do think you can get there both ways, right? But there's no way that you can get there on natural talent alone. It's it's the combination of natural talent with a work ethic, with an understanding of kind of pain and suffering that tends to be more rare.
Yeah, and I guess these days, maybe now that I think about it, you can get tough competition much earlier with all these like travel leagues and these. You can find your way to the hard competition earlier if you seek it out, I suppose. And the idea that like it's kind of becoming, like we were talking about way early on, it's kind of becoming cool to like be all in on something and just like training your heart out and failing and learning and failing and learning to the top. So maybe we're inching towards more progress on that.
Yeah, I would hope so, but I would, at least for like, if there are parents of young athletes out there, specialization is dangerous. There's a lot of research on the overuse injuries that occur when you've got kids that are specializing and are playing baseball year round. Yes, there are kids that are going to kind of work their way up, but specialization can lead to mass injuries that are going to slow progress. Not to mention, there's just like the actual burnout that kids will go through. And then there's also the benefits of being multidimensional. Tom Brady, what's his face? Mahomes would be great examples of guys that were great athletes in other sports that actually then kind of work their way back to, the one that they end up being able to excel at. And keep in mind too, the odds are really low that your kid is going to be a professional athlete. So, make sure they're having fun, right?
I don't know about yours.
Make
I'm
sure
pretty sure mine are guaranteed to be professional athletes. So
I mean, it's like there's so much they can learn about themselves and learn about success and learn about how to deal with failure. Like really look at the soft skills that can be hardened in competitive environments as a kid in the right way to build a foundation versus being so damn results oriented that you lose sight of that. Because I mean, there's no doubt, James, that your success in poker became the foundation for your success in trading,
yeah,
right? And for me, like what I learned as a competitive golfer growing up, for like helped me understand just implicitly how to be successful, in a chosen profession. So when you have to learn that stuff, when you got to go out and read books to teach you things that could be fundamentally basic to those kids, when they get later in life, like those are the big outcomes, and I think focusing on that uh, guarantees them success.
yep.
Whether or not they become professional athletes or not.
I think that's a cool think tank too for yourself. Is like, what are those intangible skills on my, like you use the word fingerprint, which is kind of like what I'm doing with Invest with Instinct, right? Is figuring out who you are and then aligning your efforts and your style to kind of fit that as best as possible. Really focus on the things that make you feel comfortable with whatever. I still haven't figured out how to properly say that, in a way yet. But I think that's a cool way to do it. Is like, so I'm pretty good at meeting people and like talking to people and conversing and whatever. And then you have other traders who will never leave their house. The big difference there. And one of the things that I hadn't really thought about until you just said it is like, well, what soft skill is there that helps my trading? And one of the things is like, well, I could probably read sentiment pretty well, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I talk to people, I ask questions, I figure out like, oh, it's interesting that you think that, and that they also think that, and they also think that, and the positioning's all on that side. So how can I best take advantage of that in a way that suits my strategy? When that other person might not be great at reading sentiment, but boy, are they good at like pricing options and knowing when there's like easy money to be made or something,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just finding like where can those soft skills like really be prevalent in what you're doing is like it's an exercise I'm probably going to go and do for
Yeah. I mean,
myself.
it's one that I don't go into much because I think there's the intersection with the actual trading knowledge that I don't
Yep.
have that is important. But a basic one that I've seen with a lot of my clients is like people who tend to be naturally pessimistic are generally better suited for short selling, and
Traders.
the opposite being true for the natural optimist. And doesn't mean you have to be one or the other, right? You could be naturally pragmatic and practical, which means that you've got the not an easy way, but a sort of a natural ability to do both, perhaps.
Yeah. There was I think a book that I read that really, what you were just saying, it's called Range, I think it was called. Talks about,
Jim Afremo.
what's that?
Jim Afremo.
Oh, I don't know art author as well. I only
Okay.
know titles, but it was basically a book
I
saying
know
the
it's
exact thing.
yeah, I know. Yeah, it's
And they talk about Federer as another kid who didn't get into tennis until like his teens, but he was like a star athlete everywhere else but tennis, and then picked up tennis, and you know he did okay for
yeah.
himself. So, but that whole book is literally dedicated to like non-specialization and why. So if you guys are interested in that conversation, check that out. I had a tweet here that you had a couple weeks ago. Said sometimes this is part of the tweet, but sometimes the answer at these times is not perfection. It's sucking less and staying really solid, avoiding the paper cuts that bleed mental and emotional capital. So you talked a little bit about this like idea of mental and emotional capital earlier. Can you dive in a little bit more to that?
It's a limited resource, and if you're treating trading like professional athletes treat their chosen sport, then the sport is the thing that dictates how they are structuring their entire life. It doesn't mean that their family and friends and the things that we would kind of on paper say are the most important things in life, come that they come second. I'm saying that they still come first, but look, I mean, to be great, right, you have to make choices. and structure your life in a way that allows you to do that. So are you doing things in your life that provide you the essential energy you need to trade properly and have the mental and emotional capital needed to come there? Because if take the extreme, you got like a weekend bender with your friends in Vegas and you come back on Monday morning, like how much worse are you going to be in terms of your ability to see, act, respond, even just kind of handle your own emotionality that might be there? So the amount of energy you're bringing to the trading day, dictates how much mental and emotional capital you have. And so yeah, how well are you sort of structured? How well you exercising? I mean, sleep, diet, exercise is kind of the basics. I don't go too deep into it because there's a lot of knowledge out there, but the idea that it flows into that is important. But then, right during the trading day, are you taking steps to preserve the energy you have? Right. So if you are the one that tends to unnecessarily stare at price action, especially even freaking the book, like what? Yeah. I mean, so how much energy are you burning just from that exercise versus maybe turning the monitor off and having alerts up, right? Depending on your style, that would be one. Others that are more kind of high frequency, finding those kind of optimal periods in the day where things tend to be more active. Or if it is a day where it's like, no, I can't peel myself away, I'm going to take 70 trades today, then what are you doing afterwards to rest and recover and to do that properly, right? And not go and have 5 drinks and then show up the next morning theoretically kind of like rested because you slept well, because you put yourself to sleep with a sleeping pill, so to speak, but because you've actually done the right work to clear your mind out and consolidate the knowledge that may have been acquired from that day, or gone through trade journal and make sure that things are kind of noted down. Bottom line is, like, clarity is an essential piece of what keeps that mental emotional capital high. So I'm not saying that you've got to take breaks during the trading day, but typically, to trade at a high level for 5 straight days is hard for a lot of traders that haven't been conditioned to this environment for the very long. If you've only been doing this for 3 to 5 years, you may not have that endurance built up yet that the traders that maybe started in the pits and now are 30 years in, just sort of have naturally from all that work. So if you don't have it, then taking breaks regularly throughout the day is huge. I mean, most people don't just like go to the gym and work out for 90 minutes straight without taking a break. That there's rest between sets, rest between. So, again, it all kind of comes down to how much capital, how much do you currently have access to, and then can you grow it over time? Absolutely. But if you're not honest with what you currently have, again, I'm just talking kind of in the trading day, then you're going to tend to kind of push yourself too hard. You're going to end up burning out. Fridays are a bad day for a lot of my clients, or a lot of people a lot of traders that I see, not because trading activity is fundamentally different, but because you've got 4 days, right? It's like the last day, and you are a little squirrely. There's a little bit more kind of fatigue there than normal, and you kind of want to go into the weekend with on a positive note. So it just gets a little bit easier, to make mistakes. That mental emotional capital is low, right? Then the eagerness or itchiness to kind of go out on a high note is higher. That combination is dangerous.
Yeah, I know that end of Friday feeling in trading is just like your body finally accepts that it's off for a second, and you just feel just an energy just drop off the map. I've done a lot of like looking into my results, and I've noticed Tuesday, Thursdays over this 10 years have always been poor days for me, on average, barring some significant events. So what I tend to do is like, and also I'm very physical. Like everything runs through my body. I'm not so much in here as I am like exterior. So like I have to do all that other stuff. I go to bed at 8:30. I try to eat relatively well. I do a lot of zone 2 cardio. I try to recover because I need to like, and I'll look at calendars and be like, where am I supposed to be peaking, right? Like what are the important economic numbers? What are the days I'm making money? What are the times of the day that don't matter as much? Like I'm trying to like, yes, position my energy in this flowing state, because you're right. Like you just can't, if you get locked into order books when, you know, we have access to 60 order books and like you're in a trade and you're just like, it's one thing I've kind of prided myself on is like with my strategy now, it's a lot of set it and forget it, right? It's a lot of early or front end work to like then put the trade on, and then if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So I don't have to necessarily be staring at an order book to like dictate entry exits, blah blah blah. But it's a super interesting thing, and it's taken me, and it's also hard to quantify, right? Like if you're like, you don't necessarily know your emotional or energy capital or whatever, your expenditure, and how much that's costing you and stuff. Like it might take 2 years of acting like an asshole outside of trading, and then 2 years of like, you know, really dialed in with everything outside of trading to realize the benefits of it all, right? Like you might just think, I could go out this weekend and do whatever. Like, but if there's like a non-farm payroll report or something the next week and you're a short-term trader, like 1 second, like one little second, you're not even going to know that you made that mistake, but you did, right? Like the entry was worse, the exit was worse, you know, whatever. So it's a really interesting topic, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one that I think traders tend not to think about as much either, right? I think there's a natural assumption that it's a job, you need to be there, and you need to versus it being that you're a performer. You are closer to an athlete than you are to a 9 to 5er. And yeah, there's I think a general understanding of mental condition, but when we raise the standard of that, of what that means, and then all of a sudden like weaknesses start to get exposed and you realize that you're, you know, not as sharp as you think you are as often as you are.
Yeah. I think, definitely to reach like that top level too. So I guess that runs in, I'll use this as the last thing. It runs into another tweet that you made, and it has, I don't know how to pronounce this, but the Yerkes-Dodson law.
Yep.
Yerk, was that right?
Yep.
So it kind of maybe applies to what we were just talking about, how there's this point in this curve, and I'll try to overlay it here when I produce this, but there's this curve and this point where you're kind of like in an optimal state of a good amount of stress and then like a good amount of performance, and you want to kind of like ride that peak as long as possible. But if you're, again, externally from trading or poker doing a lot of BS, that it might not allow you to reach that state as quickly as you'd like or whatever. So what's your opinion on this whole chart for people out there?
Yeah, basic idea is just, it's just like an upside down U. And when you are lacking a lot of energy, in the examples you just gave, you suck. But you suck equally as when you've got too much emotion, right? There's too much fear, too much overconfidence at play, too much anger, right? And so we're looking to kind of find the right mixture of emotion and energy and intensity to be at your peak, right? You said before, right? There's this kind of bad intensity, which now we could say is emotionally driven, versus the good intensity, which is more calm. So like taking time to define qualitatively what it looks and feels like to be at your best. And then what are the factors that help to produce that? You know, on my website, I've got a tool called a zone profile, which kind of is asking you these questions to be able to figure out, you know, what does that ideal optimal look like? Because then you can start to game plan for it. You can strategize around it, build a strategy to be at your best more often. But you can't do that if you don't know what the target is that you're aiming at. And so then there's that. Then there's also well, how am I going to stay there as long as possible? What are the things that cause my energy to drop or cause my intensity or emotionality to get too high? And then we're kind of game planning and strategizing. So you're just kind of oscillating yourself kind of around that peak. That's how you perform at your best most often. That's what athletes have been able to figure out and manipulate in their own mind, to strategize in their own mind, right? I recognize that I'm getting a little fatigued. I mean, actually, I played golf this past weekend and I could feel it. I hit a couple of shots where I could feel that I was trying to swing hard, which is not how it, like when I'm able to swing naturally.
Felt tired, so you felt like you needed to swing harder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so what did I do? I drank some more water. I had a snack, you know, did a few little breathing exercises, and then
you pounded 5 beers.
Yeah. then I just like allowed myself to just like naturally kind of climb back. I wasn't gonna then force that next drive. I didn't naturally dial it back either, because sometimes you can kind of swing too easily.
Yeah.
Point being, right, you kind of find that oscillation point, find that strategy. So, doing all of those things is easier when you've at least defined, what your peak looks like and how to find it.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'll put that up there. So, last thing before we go, do you feel like you've seen anything more recently in the past couple years when it comes to poker or trading that's become more of an issue than maybe 10 years ago, because of maybe the onslaught of information or the games getting harder, or what's changed, and what's like the main kind of thing you're seeing in the last couple of years, and what can people do about it?
I mean,
Or is it all the same in a way?
no, I mean, like situationally, I mean, I think it's people's focus is more fractured. And the traders that are more focused during the day for sure are capitalizing on it. But I mean, that's like a societal trend. Now, the trend that I'm going to say, I don't know if I am like, if it's factually occurring more in those groups, right, in those poker players and traders more often, or if we're just maybe talking about it more, which is like the problem that comes with high expectations and perfectionism. And frankly, we can throw golfers in that category too. I did a survey with 900 golfers, and it was like 60% of them, and these were amateur golfers. These were not professionals, although some were. But 60% of them had, what they would define as like high expectations of themselves playing that game, and that's a large number. I mean, that is, and I think in large measure, most people only view the upside of it and then don't understand the downside consequence to confidence. So you get a lot of motivation out of having high expectations, but confidence can be eroded in ways that are very subtle. And yeah, I think dealing with that problem and the emotional intensity and volatility that comes with it is something that I just am working on a lot. And it's in the mental game of trading, and there's a blog on my website on it also, but yeah, it's a big problem, I think, societally too.
Yeah, I agree. Here it is, guys. The mental game of trading, the hot plug. Actually, I didn't even know this was a thing until a couple months ago, and I was like,
no,
that's
awesome. All right.
Yeah. So, congrats on that. That's awesome that you've come into that world. So, why don't you give all the people a way to connect with you or learn from you or buy your books, and then I'll let you go. Golf.
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, I mean, yeah, books are everywhere you buy books, whether audiobook, ebook, softcover. JaredTendler.com is my website. As I mentioned before, there's some free resources, right? The worksheets that I mentioned. And I've also got a new program out called the Mental Game of Trading Live, which is a closed community where you can kind of go and help, have me help you, build out your mental game strategy. There's, lots of existing resources, but basically it's a coaching and accountability platform that you can get at a fraction of the cost of my coaching. And all that information is on jaredtendler.com as well.
Cool. All right. Well, go check it out. I appreciate, by the way, you taking some time today. And I really love this type of stuff. Like, this is my jam. I don't love talking about anything super technical. So even though this is very technical in a different way,
Yeah. So, yeah. I can tell you enjoy it. It's fun to talk about with somebody like that too.
Cool. All right. Well, have a great day, and we'll talk later.
Sounds good, James. Thanks, man.